There's a moment right before dawn when the world feels both empty and full, quiet enough to hear your heartbeat, but heavy with things unsaid. June Harper stood at the edge of her late uncle's land, cane pressed firmly into the soft dirt, breath clouding the morning chill. The horizon glowed a faint pink, and in that liminal space, between what was lost and what could be, June let herself imagine, just for a second, that she was home. She'd driven nearly 2,000 miles from the city, chasing the promise of peace after her medical discharge from the Army, after the parade of doctors and clipped voices in a folder thick with diagnoses, PTSD, anxiety, chronic pain. She needed somewhere people didn't ask questions. The ranch had always been a last resort, a half-forgotten dot on the map. But grief is a quiet magnet, and it pulled her back. The ranch was a skeleton of what it once was. The old house squatted in the middle of the property, windows shuttered, paint peeling. The air held the ghost of smoke from the fire that had swept through a year before, scorching the paddocks, leaving only blackened fences and empty fields. In the center of the largest paddock stood a single, defiant shape, a black stallion, his coat gleaming like coal, white blaze streaked down his face. His left eye was milky and clouded, blind. Scars crisscrossed his flank, a map of old battles. He watched June with a look that was almost human, wary, proud, a little bit wild. The locals had 1,000 stories about the horse. Dangerous, they whispered, untamable. Some said he'd killed a man. Others claimed he'd walked out of the fire untouched, a demon, or a miracle, depending on who you asked. At the feed store, an old-timer shook his head. That's Ash. If you're smart, you'll keep your distance. June just nodded, letting them believe what they wanted. She was good at hiding wounds, physical and otherwise. She limped her way along the fence line, heart thumping with each step. The cane was both a burden and a badge. She hated the way people looked at it, but she needed it to keep her upright. Every few yards, she paused to catch her breath, fingers tracing the battered wood. She felt eyes on her. Ash, watching. He was a statue, one ear flicked in her direction, tail twitching in the silence. June set about the work of living. The first days blurred into one another, scraping out old stalls, patching the roof, hauling buckets from the well. Each task was an anchor, something to hold her in the present. She didn't talk much, except to herself, or sometimes to the horse. In the stillness, her mind wandered, back to the desert, to the crack of gunfire, the frantic screams of animals and men. She remembered calming terrified horses in the dark, her voice a lifeline. It was easier to remember the horses than the people. She made a routine. Every evening at dusk, she'd limp out to the paddock, leaning on the cane as she watched Ash from a safe distance. He never approached, but he never ran, either. Most nights, she'd just stand there, humming under her breath. An old lullaby her mother used to sing. The song drifted across the field, carried by the wind. Once, Ash pricked his ears at the melody, turning his head just slightly. June caught her breath. Progress, maybe. But the wounds she carried were not all physical. At night, the old house creaked with memories. June lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the past. The firefight that left her with a mangled leg. The friend you couldn't save. The feeling of never quite belonging, even now, surrounded by emptiness. Some wounds don't heal. You just learn to walk with them. A week passed. June kept her distance, but curiosity grew. She asked around town. Careful, neutral questions. What did they know about Ash? A rancher named Carter said the horse had been trouble from the start, fighting every handler, breaking through fences. Someone else claimed Ash had stood over his dead mate in the fire, refusing to move until forced. Everyone agreed on one thing. The horse was cursed. But June didn't see a monster. She saw pain, something she recognized. The first real test came one evening. June shuffled along the paddock, humming as always, cane tapping the ground. Ash watched her with that single dark eye, tension coiling in his muscles. Suddenly, as if from nowhere, he charged. A flash of black, a thunder of hooves. June froze, the old instinct to run warring with the knowledge that she couldn't. Ash barreled toward her, dust rising around his feet, and stopped just short, nostrils flared, breath hot on her face. She didn't flinch, didn't move at all. They stood in silence, inches apart. She saw herself reflected in his good eye, small, tired, unbroken. After a moment, Ash stepped back, tossing his head. June let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She turned and walked away, her gait unsteady but her resolve firm. That night, she left a bucket of water at the fence and sat nearby, singing the lullaby again. Ash didn't come close, but he didn't bolt either. The boundaries were shifting, a line drawn, then softened. June felt something loosen in her chest, a knot unraveling. There are wounds you hide from the world, and there are wounds that shape who you become. June Harper had plenty of both. But as the stars blinked into existence over the ruined paddocks, she allowed herself a sliver of hope. Maybe this place, this broken land, this haunted horse, could offer a kind of sanctuary. Not healing, exactly, but a place to rest. A beginning. And out in the darkness, Ash stood watch, a silent sentinel, daring the world to try again. The mornings on Haven Hill Ranch had a stubborn quiet, a hush that felt almost sacred. Each day, June Harper pushed herself from the narrow bed in the old ranch house, the pain in her leg a familiar companion. The cane waited by the door. She'd stopped resenting it and started seeing it as another tool, like her boots or the battered gloves she wore. Every movement was an exercise in persistence, every step a quiet act of defiance. June had settled into a rhythm of rebuilding, a slow dance with the ranch's ghosts. The house itself was a patchwork of the past. Family photos yellowed with age, a cracked mug that must have once belonged to her uncle, the faint smell of smoke embedded deep into the wood. She worked alone, patching holes, scrubbing soot, making lists of what she needed to buy from town. Every evening, she carved out time for the paddock, for Ash. From the porch, she'd watch the stallion as the sun dipped low. His presence dominated the ruined paddock, a living shadow, flickering against scorched earth and twisted fence posts. Ash was all restless energy, pacing, pawing, head thrown high, sometimes rearing in frustration at the invisible boundaries that held him. The locals called him crazy, but June saw only pain and memory. Something she understood better than she cared to admit. She watched him, always from a distance at first, learning his patterns. At dusk, when the wind turned cold and the cicadas started singing, June would hobble to the fen with slow, deliberate steps, never rushing, never making sudden movements. Ash would watch her, that one good eye tracking every gesture. She hummed to him, a low, steady tune, old army lullabies or half-remembered folk songs from her childhood. It wasn't magic, but it was a language they both understood, patience. The second week, June found herself recalling things she'd tried to bury. Late at night, the past bled into the present. She remembered the outpost in Afghanistan, the way horses and mules had spooked at every distant explosion. Her job, besides everything else, had often included calming the animals, finding the rhythm in her own voice, steadying hands, murmuring to them while chaos erupted outside the wire. Even back then, she'd found peace in the company of creatures who trusted action over words. Those memories came back in pieces as she worked on the ranch, snippets of screams, flashes of fire, the weight of a dying friend in her arms. Sometimes she'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if an enemy were still just out of sight. The only thing that steadied her was the ritual of each day. Fix, clean, feed, rebuild, and always those hours with Ash. One evening, something shifted. June was limping along the fence line, head down, humming softly, when a sharp crack split the air. A fallen branch, sudden and loud. Ash spooked, rearing with a wild snort. In a flash, he thundered toward her, hooves pounding, mane streaming like a war banner. June's instinct screamed at her to run, but she couldn't, not fast enough. Not with her leg. Ash barreled right up to the fence, nostrils flaring, but he didn't strike. He stopped just short, so close she could see the flecks of white in his mane, the raw intelligence in his gaze. June met his eyes, steady as she could manage, refusing to flinch. For a heartbeat, horse and woman stared at each other, both unwilling to back down. Then Ash tossed his head, almost in frustration, and wheeled away, circling the paddock at a gallop. June let out a shaky breath, a strange smile tugging at her lips. That night, instead of just leaving water, she brought an old radio, one her uncle had used for country music, the volume barely above a whisper. She sat by the fence, not inside it, and let the gentle rise and fall of her lullaby mingle with the tinny radio sound. She didn't dare try to touch Ash, not yet, but she made her presence a promise. I am not leaving. I am not afraid of you, or of myself. See, Ash lingered at the far end of the paddock, watching. June could feel the tension humming in the air between them, a thread stretched thin, ready to snap or strengthen. Days slipped by in this strange truce. June noticed the smallest changes first. Ash spent less time pacing, more time watching. When she refilled the trough, he'd wait until she finished, then edge closer, ears flicking toward her. Sometimes he'd lower his head as she sang, nostrils flaring as if drinking in the sound. The first time he stepped within 10 feet of her, June felt a rush of victory that nearly made her cry. But progress wasn't a straight line. There were setbacks, mornings when Ash refused to come near, nights when he kicked at the fence, wild and unpredictable. One afternoon, a neighbor's dog slipped onto the property and barked furiously at the stallion. Ash panicked, racing in tight circles, sweat darkening his coat. June had to limp out, shouting, waving her cane until the dog fled. She stayed by the fence until Ash calmed, humming even after her voice grew hoarse. After that, Ash seemed more curious, or maybe less afraid. June started leaving out little offerings, an apple, a handful of oats, a fresh bucket of water. She never pushed, always retreating to the porch, letting Ash decide when or if to accept. The routine built a rhythm. Small steps, cautious hope, trust earned drop by drop. One night, thunder rolled in across the fields, shaking the windows and rattling the old barn. June lay awake, listening to the storm, heart pounding. She thought of Ash out there, alone and exposed. And for a wild moment, she wanted to run to him, to reassure him the way she'd done for terrified animals in darker places. Instead, she pressed her face to the cold glass, whispering a prayer neither of them would remember by morning. In those quiet, anxious hours, June realized what she'd suspected from the start. This was never just about taming a horse. It was about learning to trust herself again, to believe she could rebuild not just a ranch, but a life. Ash was a mirror, reflecting every wound she carried, every secret pain she thought she'd hidden. The following evening, with the air still electric from the storm, June made her way to the paddock, cane sinking into the soft mud. Ash watched her approach, muscles tight, but he didn't bolt. June set down the water bucket, humming an old melody, letting her voice carry. She saw him inch closer, step by step, until, without warning, he lowered his head to drink, close enough that June could smell the rain in his mane. For the first time, she dared to hope that both of them, horse and soldier, survivor and shadow, could learn to live with the ghosts of the paddock. The week after the storm, the air on Haven Hill felt raw, cleansed, like the ranch itself had survived some trial by water. The grass was greener for all the trouble. But puddles lingered in low places, and the fence posts leaned a little more precariously. June Harper surveyed the damage from her front porch, sipping bitter coffee, the heat soothing her tired hands. She glanced out to the paddock where Ash, the black stallion with the one blind eye, grazed with a wariness that never quite left him. Clouds still lurked on the horizon, reminders that peace, like weather, could never be trusted to last. June had learned that in the desert, where calm was only the space between explosions. Her cane sank into the wet earth as she made her way to the paddock, boots squelching with every careful step. She moved slower after rain, her legs stiff from the cold and old injuries, but there was no other way forward except steady and deliberate. Ash stood by the far fence, nostrils flaring, the whites of his eyes flashing as he tracked her. June greeted him in a voice that was half lullaby, half command. "Morning, old man," she said, voice low and even. "You and me. We're getting through another day." The horse stamped once, unimpressed. June set about her chores, scraping muck from the edges of the field, righting buckets, mending another length of battered fence. She sang as she worked, the notes rising and falling like a river, and felt the tension in her own body ease with each verse. Over time, she'd learned that healing wasn't about grand gestures. It was 100 small steps, repeated until they became habit. That afternoon, the sky turned dark again. Sudden, ominous, the kind of storm that creeps up like bad news. June could smell the change before the first rumble of thunder. She checked the barn, its roof still patched with blue tarps from the last fire, and wondered if it would hold. The wind picked up, howling through the broken slats, sending loose boards clattering across the yard. June hobbled out to the paddock, heart tight with worry for Ash. He was already agitated, trotting circles in the mud, tossing his head at every flash of lightning. The storm was coming fast, clouds stacked like bruises above the hills. She leaned on the fence, calling to him softly, voice straining to rise above the wind. "Easy, boy. I'm here." A sheet of rain slammed down, blinding, drenching her in seconds. Ash bolted to the far end, hooves churning up the soaked earth. June's heart pounded. Logic told her to go inside, but something else, call it stubbornness, call it memory, made her stay. She remembered a night overseas, pinned down by gunfire, when the only thing that kept her moving was the need to calm a terrified animal. She had survived that. Well, she would survive this. "Come on, Ash," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "You're not alone." The horse circled, sides heaving, eye wild with fear. June, ignoring the pain in her leg, opened the gate and stepped inside. Every instinct screamed that this was reckless, even dangerous, but she moved slow, letting him see her, hear her voice. She hummed the lullaby, the one that had comforted soldiers and animals alike. Raindrops stung her face, thunder cracked overhead, but she didn't stop. Ash stopped running. He turned toward her, ears pricked. June froze, pulse roaring in her ears, afraid to hope. The stallion took a single, hesitant step, then another, mud splattering his black legs. He was close enough that she could see the fine quiver of his nostrils, the trembling in his flanks. Another bolt of lightning split the sky, and Ash flinched, but didn't bolt. June extended her hand, palm open, nothing but trust between them. "It's okay," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, something broke. A barrier, a wall of old pain. Ash lowered his head, breath warm against her fingers. June held still, every muscle taut, until she felt his nose brush her palm. It was barely a touch, a ghost of contact, but it meant everything. Tears pricked her eyes, mixing with rain, and she let herself breathe. The storm raged on, but for a few heartbeats, the world narrowed to horse and woman in the space where trust could grow. June backed away slowly, letting Ash settle, then closed the gate behind her. She limped to the barn, soaked and shaking, a quiet laugh breaking through her exhaustion. That night, after the storm had passed and the house was silent except for the drip of water from the eaves, June wrote about the moment in her journal. She described the fear, the stubborn hope, the electric thrill of being seen and accepted even for a second. She wrote about how healing was 1,000 small steps, how sometimes you just had to stand in the storm and wait for trust to find you. The next morning dawned bright and clear, as if the world had been washed clean. June moved slowly, soreness in every joint, but her spirit lighter. She took extra time with her coffee, watching sunlight glint on puddles, the ranch glistening with new promise. In the paddock, Ash stood at the gate, waiting. June approached, humming softly. He didn't run. He watched her, ears forward, muscles taut, but he didn't run. June smiled, heart swelling with pride and something close to love. She set a fresh bucket of water by the gate, placed an apple on the fence post, and stepped back to give him space. Ash approached, sniffed the offering, and after a moment took the apple from the post. He chewed slowly, eye on June, as if weighing her soul. She laughed, a rich, honest sound that startled even her. The stallion didn't spook. He finished the apple, then stood a little closer, breathing in the morning air. Every day after that, June built on this small victory. She repeated the routines. Same time, same songs, same gentle words. She never forced, never rushed. Some days were better than others. Sometimes Ash regressed, pacing or ignoring her, but each setback was smaller than the last. Over time, he started to come when he heard her humming, ears flicking, head low and cautious. June began to dream, tentative dreams of what could be, of riding again, of teaching Ash that not all humans were to be feared. She started sketching designs for a saddle that could accommodate her cane, a challenge that filled her evenings with purpose. She researched gentle training methods, filling notebooks with strategies, determined to build something new from the ruins of the past. But always, she remembered the lesson of the storm: healing. For both horse and woman was never linear. It came in fits and starts, a journey of small steps and sudden leaps, setbacks and triumphs, all built on the fragile foundation of trust. As the days grew longer and the grass returned, June watched Ash for signs of change. A softer gaze, a quieter stance, a willingness to wait for her by the gate. Each moment was a victory, a reminder that even the wildest hearts could learn to hope again. And as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in gold and purple, June found herself humming a new song, one she hadn't heard since childhood. She sang for the ranch, for herself, a song of storms weathered, of small steps taken, of hope rising from broken ground. Out in the paddock, Ash stood listening, the distance between them smaller than ever before. June Harper's days had begun to settle into a kind of gentle rhythm, the rawness of her first weeks on the ranch smoothed into something almost peaceful. She'd found comfort in small victories: Ash waiting at the gate each morning, the steady routine of feeding, humming, mending. Yet, as spring crept forward, a new kind of tension crept into the air, a sense that peace here was as fragile as the fence lines she patched each day. In small towns, old stories die hard and shadows never stay buried for long. It started on a Monday, the kind of morning so bright and still it made you think maybe, just maybe, the worst had passed. June was at the barn, patching a section of wall where the wood had rotted through, when she heard the crunch of tires on gravel, a sound that set her nerves jangling. Visitors were rare out here. She wiped her hands on her jeans and limped to the porch just as a dark SUV rolled to a stop by the gate. A man stepped out. Tall, broad-shouldered, his movements stiff with old anger. Wade Mercer. June had heard the name whispered in town, always with a mix of respect and caution. The Mercers had run cattle here for generations, their influence lingering over every deal and dispute in the valley. Wade's face was sunburned and stern, his eyes pale and sharp under a battered hat. He surveyed the ranch with a soldier's precision before his gaze settled on June. "Morning," she called, forcing her voice steady. "Can I help you?" Wade looked her up and down, taking in the cane, the faded army t-shirt, the scars she no longer bothered to hide. "You June Harper?" His voice was all gravel and challenge. "That's me." He nodded once, slow, then let his gaze drift to the paddock, where Ash grazed near the fence. The stallion lifted his head, nostrils flaring, as if he sensed the weight in the air. "You know," Wade said, "that horse nearly killed a man, or so folks say. You sure you want to keep him around?" June met his stare without flinching. "He's never hurt me. Yet." The word hung heavy, thick with threat and memory. Wade stepped closer, his voice low. "That animal's dangerous. It's not just gossip. My father—" He trailed off, jaw tightening. June recognized the look. She'd seen it in fellow soldiers, the way old wounds turn fresh at the smallest provocation. I'm sorry about your father, June said, quietly. Wade's mouth twisted. You don't know anything about it. He died in this valley, thrown by a wild stallion. Not this one, but the same blood. These horses, they're trouble, and that one's worse than most. June bristled, but held her ground. Every animal's got a reason for what they do. Ash has been through a lot. So have I. Maybe what he needs isn't fear, but a chance. Wade shook his head. You don't understand? People talk, but they don't know what it's like to find your father, broken in a field, blood in the dust, hoof prints all around. I grew up hearing that story, living in its shadow. And now you bring this horse here. Let him run free. He cut himself off, fists clenching. For a moment, June almost felt sorry for him. Pain, she'd learned, had a way of shaping people into hard things. I'm careful, she said, her voice softer. I know what I'm doing. Maybe. But you don't know what you're inviting. I'll tell you straight. Some of us think that animal should be put down. For public safety. June's heart thudded. She'd heard the whispers, the sideways glances in town. Still, to have it spoken aloud, she saw the stubbornness in Wade's stance. The threat of escalation. I can handle Ash, she replied. He's not a killer. He's just scared, like a lot of us. Wade's eyes narrowed. This isn't over. He turned and stalked back to his SUV, gravel spitting under his boots. June watched him go, the weight of the conversation settling heavy on her shoulders. She glanced toward the paddock, finding Ash staring back, ears pinned, muscles tight. Somehow, the stallion seemed to understand the storm that was gathering. The encounter left June shaken, doubts gnawing at the edges of her resolve. Was she being reckless? Was Ash truly a danger she couldn't see? The memories pressed in, friends lost to accidents, to bad judgment. She found herself up late, pacing the dark kitchen, replaying Wade's words. Sometimes she wondered if she was just projecting her own trauma onto the horse, reading kinship into scars that were only skin deep. Still, the next morning she did what she always did. She filled Ash's water, checked the fences, sang her lullabies. But the air felt different, the routines edged with unease. At the feed store, the cashier, a young woman named Becky, hesitated before bagging June's supplies. Wade Mercer was in here yesterday, she said. He's saying Ash should be put down. People listen to him. June forced a smile. Not everyone's afraid of a challenge. Becky looked away, guilt flickering. Just be careful, okay? The rumors spread. A group of ranchers petitioned the sheriff, claiming Ash was a threat to public safety. June received 2 anonymous notes in her mailbox. One a warning, the other a threat. Put him down before he puts you down. She tore them up, but the fear lingered, crawling under her skin at night. One evening, as dusk settled and the air buzzed with cicadas, June stood by the paddock, lost in thought. Ash approached the fence, closer than he'd ever dared before. June didn't move, didn't speak. The silence between them was full of all the things neither could say. She reached out, resting her hand on the post, fingers trembling. They want to end you because they're afraid, she whispered. But fear isn't always right. I know what it's like to be judged by scars. Ash lowered his head, brushing the post with his nose. June felt a tear slide down her cheek, hot and unbidden. Oh. For a moment, horse and woman simply breathed together, sharing the weight of their shadows. But even as she found comfort in Ash's presence, June knew the fight was just beginning. Wade Mercer's crusade had given the town a target, and fear, once unleashed, was hard to contain. She wrote in her journal that night, "What if I'm wrong? What if saving him puts us both in more danger?" Still, she couldn't bring herself to quit. The ranch had become her sanctuary, Ash her mirror. Both broken, both hunted by the past, both trying to find a way forward. The next morning, June found a sign hammered to her gate. Danger, wild horse. Someone had painted it in bright red letters, a warning and a threat. June pulled it down, jaw clenched, heart pounding. She knew she'd have to fight harder now. not just for Ash, but for the right to heal, to belong, to choose hope over fear. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across the paddock, June stood with her back straight, her cane planted firmly in the earth. The battle lines had been drawn, old pain awakened, and the ghosts of the past had come calling. But June Harper wasn't ready to surrender. Not to Wade Mercer, not to her own doubts, and certainly not to fear. Out in the field, Ash watched her, his gaze steady and unbroken. For the first time, June wondered if maybe, just maybe, he'd been waiting for her to fight. The days that followed Wade Mercer's visit moved slower, weighted by a tension that seemed to seep into every corner of Haven Hill Ranch. June Harper tried to keep her head down, focusing on routines, cleaning, mending, feeding, repairing. But beneath each simple task was a constant gnawing anxiety. Rumors about Ash, the killer horse, spread like a prairie fire. Every time June drove into town, she felt eyes on her. Some filled with pity, others with open suspicion. The ranch felt smaller, more isolated, every shadow sharper than before. Yet it was in this pressure, with judgment pressing from all sides, that June and Ash began to move closer. June, unwilling to lose herself to doubt, turned to journaling as a way to make sense of the storm within. She wrote late into the night, describing every interaction, every small win and setback, her words flowing with a raw honesty she could never share with neighbors or strangers. Sometimes her handwriting trembled. Sometimes the ink blurred from tears. But the ritual became a lifeline, a way to keep fear from swallowing hope. It was early one evening. Pink clouds smeared across the sky, when something changed between June and Ash. She'd just finished jotting a few notes. Ash allowed me to stand near him while he drank. Seemed calmer today. Maybe he knows I'm hurting too. When she glanced out the window and saw the stallion standing by the fence, utterly still, as if waiting. His mane glimmered in the last light, the white blaze down his face bright as bone. Taking a deep breath, June grabbed her cane and stepped outside, humming a gentle tune. Ash watched her, ears pricked, but didn't move away. With each step, June's heart hammered harder in her chest. She stopped just a few feet from him and sat on the low bench she'd dragged out for such moments, close enough to feel the heat of his body, far enough that he could bolt if he wished. She continued her song, letting it wrap around the silence like a comforter. Slowly, ever so slowly, Ash lowered his head, the breath from his nostrils stirring June's hair. She closed her eyes, overwhelmed by a sense of vulnerability, both hers and his. Then, with a tentative gentleness that nearly broke her, Ash rested his head, heavy, scarred, trusting, on her shoulder. June froze, afraid to breathe, afraid to ruin the moment. The sensation of his weight was grounding, powerful, and for a heartbeat, she felt all the pain and loneliness of her past dissolve. Her breath caught, and without warning, she began to weep. Silent, shaking sobs that she'd kept locked away for too long. Ash didn't move, didn't shy away from her tears. If anything, he pressed closer, his one good eye closing, as if he understood that this moment was as much for him as it was for her. When her crying faded to trembling sighs, June found herself laughing softly, the absurdity of it all. War veteran, haunted horse, lost on a broken ranch, suddenly beautiful in its rawness. She stroked Ash's neck, whispering nonsense, gratitude, apology. She told him things she hadn't dared say aloud, about guilt, about fear, about the ache of trying to build something when the world expects you to fail. And Ash listened, still as a stone, an anchor in the wild current of her grief. After that night, something shifted between them. They weren't just wary survivors anymore. They were allies, partners in the quiet struggle to heal. June began introducing small, gentle training exercises. She set up a soft rope halter, always in sight, never forced. Ash sniffed it, chewed at the ends, but never panicked. She walked him around the paddock, sometimes singing, sometimes just talking about the mundane tasks of the day. Each lesson was short, always ending with praise, a treat, or simply a long, gentle stroke down his scarred neck. The biggest hurdle was the saddle. June's injury meant she couldn't ride with a regular setup. Her solution was a project weeks in the making, a custom saddle designed to accommodate her cane, with extra padding for balance and loops for easy grip. She worked in the barn late at night, cursing at bent nails and stubborn leather, her determination as fierce as any she'd felt on the battlefield. Ash watched from his stall, sometimes nudging her with his nose as if to say, "Hurry up." Word of June's progress began to leak out, despite her efforts to keep things quiet. The first to notice was Jamie, a curious 10-year-old from town whose father owned a nearby feed store. Jamie had a habit of biking out to the edge of the ranch and peeking through the fence, his round face wide-eyed with wonder. One afternoon, as June led Ash through a series of gentle figure eights, she heard Jamie's voice pipe up from the other side of the rails. "Is he really as mean as people say?" June glanced over, grinning. "He's just misunderstood, like a lot of us." Jamie's eyes lit up. "Can I watch?" June nodded, and soon the boy became a regular fixture at the fence, sometimes bringing his friends, sometimes just sitting quietly, hands clutching the wire as if afraid to breathe too loudly. Word traveled fast in a small town. Before long, others came, an older woman from church, a young couple who'd moved back after college, a shy teenager with a stutter. They came out of curiosity, or because they'd heard rumors, or because deep down they wanted to believe in second chances. June was careful not to make Ash a spectacle. She let them see only what she wanted: patience, trust, small victories. She made a point to talk about the hard days, or two, about setbacks and fear, about how healing wasn't linear for people or horses. One crisp morning, as Ash let her slip the halter over his head with only a moment's hesitation, June realized how far they'd come. She could walk him around the paddock now, her cane clicking rhythmically against the packed earth. Ash moved beside her, head low, muscles relaxed, no longer a shadow, now a companion. She felt pride and something sweeter, hope. In her journal that night, June wrote, "He trusts me now, and maybe that means I can trust myself again too." Still, there were reminders of the world outside their fragile peace. June would spot Wade Mercer's truck parked at the end of her drive, headlights glowing at dusk before disappearing. Sometimes she'd find new warnings in her mailbox, written in the same jagged hand. She kept them all in a shoebox under her bed, not out of fear, but as proof of what she and Ash were up against. But as winter faded and green returned to the valley, the mood on Haven Hill grew lighter. June wasn't naive. She knew there were battles yet to come, but for now, there was laughter in the yard, the sweet scent of fresh hay, the promise of morning. There was Ash, sleeping in the sun, a living answer to everyone who said he'd never be tamed. And there was June, her scars still there, but her silence finally cracked, the light starting to pour in, and out at the fence, Jamie whispered to his friends, "Told you they could do it." Hope, June thought, is contagious. And she and Ash were finally starting to spread it. Spring in the valley brought wildflowers and the hum of bees, but it also brought something darker, a restless energy, a sense that the past had not yet finished its work. For June Harper and Ash, each day was a testament to perseverance. Their bond had grown stronger, but so had the scrutiny from the outside world. June could feel it in the lingering stares at the feed store, the whispers behind her back, the way Wade Mercer's truck sometimes lingered at the edge of the property. Hope and suspicion now existed side by side on Haven Hill. Despite the mounting pressure, June and Ash continued their work. The paddock became a classroom, a sanctuary, a battleground. June introduced new exercises, gentle groundwork, leading with soft cues, longer walks using her custom saddle. The first time she placed the saddle on Ash's back, her hands trembled, but the stallion stood calm, trusting her movements. Each success was hard-won, and June celebrated them in her journal at night, her heart swelling with pride. Jamie and his friends kept coming, sometimes bringing small crowds. They watched, wide-eyed, as June mounted Ash for the first time. her cane tucked into the special holster she'd stitched by hand. With each step, Ash carried her as if he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. The children cheered, laughter echoing over the fields. Even some of the adults who had doubted now offered hesitant waves or nods of respect. But not everyone wanted to believe in miracles. Wade Mercer's campaign intensified. He cornered June at the grocery store, his voice low and sharp. People forget, but I don't. That animal's a risk. You're making everyone nervous. June stood her ground. Ash is not the enemy. He's proof that healing's possible. Wade glared. Healing or denial? When someone gets hurt again, remember, I warned you. June didn't flinch. She knew his pain ran deeper than anger, but his words left a mark, the weight of them pressing against her chest as she drove home that night. Soon after, the whispers had turned to outright lies. Rumors began to swirl. Ash had nearly trampled a child. Ash had broken down a neighbor's fence. Ash was becoming wild again. None of it was true, but truth is rarely as interesting as fear. June found herself more vigilant, double-checking the gates, locking up the barn every night, keeping her phone within reach. Jamie's parents asked if it was safe for him to visit. June reassured them, but she could see their worry. Then, one restless night, the unthinkable happened. June was writing in her journal when she smelled it. A sharp, acrid scent, faint but unmistakable. Smoke. She dropped her pen, heart hammering, and limped to the window. Outside, orange flickered against the darkness. Fire, somewhere near the barn. Her training kicked in. She snatched her boots and raced outside, the pain in her leg forgotten in the adrenaline rush. The barn was aglow, flames licking up the old dry wood. Somewhere inside, Ash screamed, a high, terrified sound that cut through June's soul. "Ash!" she shouted, running faster than she thought possible. The barn door was already too hot to touch, smoke pouring through the cracks. June grabbed a shovel, swinging it against the latch, coughing as smoke filled her lungs. "Hold on!" she called, choking. "I'm coming!" Inside, the world was chaos. Heat, choking air, splintering wood. She could barely see, but she heard Ash, thrashing, trapped by a fallen beam. June moved by instinct, dragging at the debris, muscles burning. "Come on! Come on!" Another crash. Flames raced up the walls, filling the barn with a hellish glow. Then, through the smoke, Ash's shape appeared, eyes wild, coat streaked with sweat and soot. The stallion saw June, and for a heartbeat, everything paused. Then Ash reared, and with a desperate strength, kicked at the collapsing barn door. The wood splintered, beams falling, but Ash pushed forward, crashing into the open, his powerful legs carrying both himself and June out into the night. The barn collapsed behind them in a storm of sparks and embers. June stumbled, skin stinging from burns, coughing uncontrollably. Ash circled her, nickering, almost frantic. She collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air, clutching her hands, raw, blistered, throbbing with pain. Neighbors' voices drifted through the dark, someone shouting to call the fire department. Others yelling about horses in danger. Sirens wailed in the distance as people rushed from their homes, drawn by the glow. Jamie's father found June on the ground and helped her up. "You're hurt. We have to get you to the hospital." June shook her head, searching for Ash, but the stallion was gone. Spooked by the flames and the noise, he had bolted into the hills, disappearing into the chaos. Paramedics arrived, wrapping June's burned hands, urging her to rest. "You're lucky to be alive," one said, voice gentle but insistent. "The horse saved you. He got you out just in time." June was barely conscious as they loaded her into the ambulance, but she clung to that truth. Ash had saved her. When everyone else wanted him gone, he'd chosen to protect her. In the fluorescent quiet of the ER, with bandages on her hands and painkillers dulling her mind, June wept. Not just for herself, but for Ash, alone and wounded, lost in the wild. News of the fire spread quickly. Some people blamed June's recklessness. Others whispered about Mercer, his campaign against Ash, the escalating threats. June heard rumors that someone had seen a figure near the barn that night, but no one could prove anything. Wade denied any involvement. his face cold and closed when June confronted him at the sheriff's office. "I wouldn't risk my family's name on something so stupid," he said, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a shadow that wouldn't leave. In the days that followed, the ranch was a blackened skeleton, the barn a heap of ashes. June's hands were wrapped in thick white gauze, every movement agony. But the pain in her heart was sharper. Ash was gone, somewhere in the hills, wounded and terrified. June could hardly sleep, haunted by dreams of fire and smoke, of running through darkness and always being too late. But she refused to give up. Each morning, despite her injuries, June limped to the edge of the property, calling for Ash, singing the same lullabies that had once built their fragile trust. Sometimes Jamie came too, searching the brush with a pair of battered binoculars. "He'll come back," Jamie insisted, his hope fierce. "He has to." The town buzzed with theories. Some said Ash was dead, others swore they'd seen him by the river, limping but alive. A few offered to help search, their earlier doubts transformed by the drama of the fire and the undeniable proof of Ash's courage. A small crowd gathered each evening, watching the horizon, hoping for a miracle. But under the surface, suspicion lingered. June knew that as long as Ash was gone, he'd be a ghost, blamed for every broken fence, every spooked cow. Mercer's campaign didn't die with the fire. If anything, it grew louder, more insistent. But June, even as she lay awake with her bandaged hands and battered soul, refused to let fear win. She wrote in her journal, scrawling words left-handed, "He saved me. I'll save him too." The fire within, pain, loss, hope, burned brighter than ever. And out beyond the ranch, in the wild country between river and mountain, a black stallion limped through moonlight, searching for the only voice that had ever promised him safety. Pain was a constant, but for June Harper, hope hurt even more. Bandages swaddled her burned hands, raw and stiff, but it was the ache in her chest, the guilt, the longing, that kept her from sleep. The barn was gone, charred timbers marking where years of memories had burned away. Ash was gone, too, vanished into the wilderness, a ghost haunting the valley. For 2 days after the fire, June lay in her hospital bed, tormented by images of Ash running alone through the night, wounded and afraid. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw fire licking the barn walls, heard the frantic beat of hooves and her own desperate shouts. The doctors wanted her to stay for a week. June lasted less than 3 days. She signed herself out, stubbornness outpacing pain. Jamie and his parents met her at the ranch gate. The yard was a mess, the air still heavy with the bitter tang of smoke. Neighbors had come and gone, offering casseroles, condolences, or awkward silence. Jamie, though, was relentless. "We're going to find him," he said, voice fierce for a 10-year-old. "He saved you. Now we save him." June squeezed his hand with her good one. "We will. I promise." She moved slow, every step an effort. The search began at dawn the next morning. June, Jamie, and a handful of volunteers, ranchers, veterans from town, and even Becky from the feed store, fanned out across the hills. June mapped the riverbanks and meadows, the pine stands where Ash might hide. They looked for broken branches, hoof prints in the mud, strands of black mane snagged on wire. Each sign was hope. Each hour, a test of faith. Despite the town's division, some people came together for the first time in years. The threat of the fire, the shock of June's near death, the story of Ash saving her. All of it blurred old grudges and made the search for the lost stallion a cause larger than fear. People brought binoculars, thermal scopes, or even a drone or two. The valley buzzed with effort and tension, but there were still those who muttered that it was all a waste. Better off if the dangerous horse never came back. On the third day, as dusk fell golden over the blackened barn, June called a halt. She stood by the fence, shoulders slumped, exhaustion painting her features. Jamie climbed the paddock rails, scanning the horizon for the 100th time. "He's out there," he insisted. He knows you're looking.
June wanted to believe him, but she was haunted by doubt. Was she risking others by bringing Ash back? Was she just trying to redeem herself through the stallion, projecting her brokenness onto him? The town's suspicion, Wade Mercer's threats, the pain in her hands, all of it swirled inside her like the smoke from the ruined barn. That night, as the others drifted home, June found herself staring into the dark. The wind rattled the new padlocks on the gates, the memory of Wade Mercer's warning still echoing in her mind. She knew what she had to do. She drove her battered pickup down the valley to Mercer's sprawling ranch, headlights slicing the dusk. The Mercer's place was bigger, richer, fences straight and painted, horses gleaming in the twilight. Wade was out by the barn, hosing mud off his boots. He looked up, surprise flaring, then suspicion. Harper, didn't expect to see you. June limped out, leaning heavier than usual on her cane. Can we talk? Wade hesitated. About what? She took a breath, her voice low but steady. I'm not here to accuse. I just want to know why. Why you're so afraid, why Ash scares you so much you'd try to turn the whole town against him. Wade dropped the hose, water pooling at his feet. For a moment his jaw worked, and June saw the war behind his eyes. Anger, fear, shame. He rubbed his face, looking away toward the hills. You don't know what it's like, Harper. My dad, that horse didn't mean to kill him, but he did. I found him after laying there, all twisted. Ever since I can't even look at those wild stallions without remembering. June's tone softened. Hey, you lost your father. I get it. But fear doesn't have to decide what comes next. He met her gaze, bitter but searching. Easy for you to say. You're the hero now. The town loves a story where the monster turns out to be a savior. But what if you're wrong? What if he hurts someone? June's hands trembled as she spoke, but her voice was clear. I live with fear every day. Ash does too. Fear is real, but so is healing. If we let what scares us control our lives, we never move forward. We never get better. Wade's anger faltered, replaced by something rawer. Grief, maybe, or the faintest spark of understanding. Ray, I never wanted to hurt you, Harper. Or your horse. I didn't want anyone else to end up like my dad. June nodded. I know. But mercy is a choice. I'm asking you to let him have a chance. That's all any of us are asking for. They stood in silence, the dusk deepening. June could see Wade's walls crumbling just a little. Maybe it wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something close. As she turned to leave, Wade called after her. If you find him, if he comes back, call me. I want to see for myself. Back at Haven Hill, the search resumed at dawn. Jamie and June, joined by neighbors and old friends, combed the valley in grids. Becky brought sandwiches, the veterans offered advice, and a shy teenager brought a first aid kit just in case. The effort became a ritual, searching, calling, singing June's lullaby across the hills, hope battling exhaustion. On the fifth day, hope finally answered. A young boy named Eric, out looking by the river, found hoof prints, fresh, unmistakable. He followed them, heart pounding, until he spotted Ash, standing knee-deep in the shallows, drinking from the cold stream. The stallion was limping, his coat matted but alive. Eric ran for help, voice ringing down the valley. June, Jamie, and several neighbors hurried to the riverbank. When Ash saw them, he tensed, ready to bolt, but June began to hum. Her voice rough but steady, the old lullaby echoing over water and wind. Ash pricked his ears and, step by shaky step, let them approach. June wept openly, whispering thanks as she slipped a halter over his head, Jamie cheering by her side. The crowd watched in awe as Ash nuzzled June's arm, battered but unbroken. They led him home, the sun setting behind them, hope and forgiveness mingling on the breeze. That night, neighbors left flowers and apples at the fence, quiet tokens of respect and apology. Even Wade Mercer, true to his word, drove by and watched from the road,
silent but no longer an enemy. In her journal, June wrote, "Forgiveness is hard, but letting go of fear is the first step toward healing. For me, for Ash, for all of us." Out in the paddock, Ash rested at last, safe and home. And for the first time since the fire, June Harper slept without nightmares, her heart mending, one small piece at a time. Dawn broke with a hush that seemed to vibrate through the battered fields of Haven Hill Ranch. The world outside glistened with dew, every blade of grass reflecting the soft pink promise of a new beginning. June Harper woke before her alarm, the pain in her hands eased to a dull ache. Hope, a feeling she had nearly forgotten, beat gently beneath her ribs. Ash was home. Against all odds, the black stallion had returned from the wilderness, led back by the faith of a child and the determination of a town beginning to heal. But Ash was changed. He limped as he walked, favoring his front leg, the black of his coat streaked with mud and burrs. There were cuts along his flank, some fresh and raw, others scabbed over from lonely nights in the wild. Yet when June opened the paddock gate, Ash greeted her with a low nicker and pressed his scarred nose to her bandaged hand. She felt his breath, hot, alive, real, anchor her in a way that no words ever could. Jamie and Eric arrived at sunrise, racing each other up the dirt road, their bikes kicking up rooster tails of dust. Both boys dropped their bikes in the yard and rushed to the paddock fence. "He's back! He's really back!" Jamie shouted, his grin so wide it threatened to split his freckled cheeks. June smiled, wiping away a tear. "You two are part of the reason why?" They spent the morning tending to Ash. June gently washed the stallion's wounds, her burned hands clumsy but careful, murmuring the same lullabies that had once coaxed him from fear. Ash stood still, eyes half closed, trusting her. Eric helped fetch clean water. Jamie read aloud from a library book about horses and healing, his voice clear and determined as if the words themselves could knit flesh and spirit. News of Ash's return traveled quickly. By midday, a small crowd had gathered at the fence. Some were curious. Others just needed to see with their own eyes that the horse many had feared was, in the end, just another soul longing for safety. Among them was Mrs. Lopez, whose late husband had built fences for the ranch decades ago, young couples holding hands, a few gruff ranchers who'd scoffed at June's determination. There was even a sheriff's deputy in a battered cruiser, nodding approval as he drove by. June had learned not to let crowds distract her. She kept her focus on Ash, whispering to him, reading every flick of his ear, every tremor in his side. She knew the true healing was not in the spectacle, but in the quiet, everyday acts of trust and care. Still, the town's eyes brought a different kind of pressure, one she hadn't expected. Whispers of miracle horse and second chances floated on the breeze. Some parents asked if their children could help with chores or learn about horses. Several older veterans, drawn by rumors of June's own past, stopped by to swap stories, or simply stand in silence near the paddock, sharing unspoken understanding. That afternoon, June stood before the gathered crowd and told the story as honestly as she could. She spoke of her own journey, of pain and failure, of falling and getting back up. She told them Ash was not a miracle, but a survivor, as broken and stubborn as anyone who'd ever lost and tried again. "I don't know what tomorrow will bring," she finished, voice rough but unwavering. "But I believe healing is for everyone, horse or human. We all carry scars, seen and unseen. What matters is what we do with them." A hush fell. Then one by one, people clapped. Soft at first, then swelling, not just for Ash, but for the hope of something better. June flushed, humbled and proud all at once. The sun was high when she slipped away from the crowd, eating quiet. She found Ash standing in the shade of the rebuilt lean-to, chewing on fresh hay. She sat beside him, breathing in the peace that always seemed to gather around the stallion. For a while, she closed her eyes and just listened to the wind, the distant voices of children, the heartbeat of the ranch. That's when Becky from the feed store approached, a hesitant smile on her lips. She handed June an envelope. No return address, only her name on the front. June opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a check, substantial enough to replace the barn and start something new. No note. Only the signature. Wade Mercer. June's breath caught. She looked up and saw him standing by his truck, hat low, watching from a distance. Their eyes met for just a moment. Wade nodded, stiff but genuine, before climbing in and driving away. June's heart swelled, and forgiveness was never clean or simple, but it could grow where you least expected, sometimes in silence, sometimes as a gift given without fanfare.
That evening, June made a decision. Sitting by Ash, watching the sun sink below the hills, she realized Haven Hill could be more than just a refuge for her and a single horse. It could become a sanctuary, a place where others could come to heal, learn, and find the kind of peace she had nearly lost. She thought of the veterans who visited, of kids like Jamie and Eric, of the foster children she'd met in town who needed somewhere to belong. The next day, June posted a notice on the community board and spread the word. Haven Hill was opening its gates as a rehabilitation ranch for both animals and people scarred by life. If you need a second chance, come find it here, the sign read. The response was immediate. Volunteers arrived to help clear brush, mend fences, plant flowers. Foster families brought children to brush ash, to feed the chickens, to listen to stories. A gentle brown mare, rescued from neglect, became Ash's companion. June led therapy sessions for veterans in the shade of the old sycamore tree, her own limp, a reminder that healing doesn't mean forgetting. Evenings became a chorus of laughter and hope, children's voices mingling with the nicker of horses, adults sharing coffee and hard-won wisdom. The ranch pulsed with new life. Haven Hill was no longer a place to hide. It was a beacon. Late one night, June stood on the porch, watching ash graze beneath a sky bursting with stars. She felt the presence of those she'd lost, the weight of every day she'd survived. In the quiet, she whispered thanks for pain, for fire, for every soul that had dared to return to the flame and found their way home. Haven Hill, once ashes, was reborn, not as a symbol of perfection, but as a living, breathing proof that broken things could become beautiful, not despite their scars, but because of them. And out in the pasture, Ash raised his head, ears flicking toward June, as if he, too, understood that they had finally found their sanctuary. The days that followed Haven Hill's transformation pulsed with a kind of life June Harper had never known, life that wasn't measured by old wounds or the threat of disaster, but by laughter, growth, and the slow, steady work of healing. The new barn, its timbers smelling of fresh pine, rose from the ashes where the old one had stood, and neighbors and strangers alike pitched in, hauling boards, painting walls, repairing fences, and filling the air with the sound of hammers and good-natured bickering. The ranch felt alive, not just with animals and people, but with hope rekindled from all that had burned. Word of the new mission spread far beyond the small town. Veterans from neighboring counties came, some limping, some silent, some carrying invisible burdens heavier than any saddle. Foster youth arrived, awkward, unsure, but curious. Local volunteers, old and young, found themselves drawn into the rhythm of the place. It was as if Haven Hill had always been waiting for this, its battered fields and patchwork fences now a canvas for second chances. Ash was at the center of it all. He had become more than a story, more than a cautionary tale. June watched him move through the paddocks, his gait still stiff from the injuries of his time in the wild, his coat slowly regaining its luster under the children's constant brushing. He was never the most beautiful horse, never the fastest or the gentlest, but he was steadfast. With every hesitant approach from a child or a wary veteran, Ash responded with the patience June had only ever seen, buried in the bravest souls. One afternoon, a group of foster kids arrived for their first visit. Some hung back, arms crossed and eyes darting, while others ran straight for the barn, hungry for distraction. June had learned not to force anything. She simply showed them how to move slowly, to speak softly, to let the animals come to them. Ash was especially gentle with the quietest children, the ones who didn't speak or flinched at sudden noises. He would stand perfectly still, lowering his head to their level, letting small hands trace the line of his blaze, or feel the softness of his nose. A moment burned itself into June's memory. A boy named Mason, 11 years old and nearly mute from trauma, standing beside Ash in the paddock. Mason's fists were clenched at his sides, his shoulders rigid. June waited, silent, as Ash stepped forward, breathing slowly, eyes half closed and calm. Mason reached out, hesitated, then pressed his palm to Ash's flank. A shudder ran through the boy, and then, miraculously, he began to hum, a quiet, tuneless melody. Ash flicked his ear, leaned into the touch, and June saw a crack open in the boy's armor, just enough for sunlight to seep in. It was moments like these, fragile, fleeting, that defined the ranch now. June kept her journal, but it was no longer only for sorrow and struggle. She wrote about small victories. A girl who overcame her fear of horses, a veteran who laughed for the first time in years, a volunteer who found purpose in work that mattered. The local fair came around, and for the first time, Haven Hill was invited to participate. June loaded Ash into a borrowed trailer, her own nerves jangling, remembering all the warnings and accusations from the past. But this time, she had support. Jamie and Eric rode in the truck with her, wearing matching t-shirts that read Team Ash. Becky from the feed store helped wrangle the gear, and several volunteers promised to meet them there. The fairground was a chaos of smells and sound: funnel cakes, popcorn, the shrieks of children on carnival rides. June felt the familiar surge of anxiety in crowds, but Ash seemed to anchor her, just as she anchored him. She led him around the ring, kids lining up for a chance to pat his nose or slip him an apple slice. Some adults still eyed Ash warily, but most had heard the story: the horse that survived fire, the woman who refused to give up, the ranch that gave them both a second chance. June was invited to speak on the small stage as the sun set. The crowd gathered on hay bales and folding chairs. She stood with Ash at her side, feeling the weight of every eye upon her. Her hands, still marked by scars, trembled as she held the microphone. "I used to think healing meant getting rid of all the scars," she began, voice steady, strong. "That if I just tried hard enough, I could go back to who I was before the pain, before the fire, before the loss. But Ash taught me something different. Healing isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about learning to live with the scars, to let them become part of your story, not the whole thing." She looked out at the audience, at Jamie and Eric, at Mason and the other foster kids, at the veterans who stood in the back, arms folded but eyes shining. This ranch is here for anyone who needs it. Horses, people, anyone who's ever felt like they didn't belong, because we all deserve another chance. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. A hush settled. Then applause, gentle at first, then rising, filling the twilight air. Ash nickered softly, nudging June's shoulder, as if to say he agreed. As the crowd dispersed, June saw Wade Mercer standing at the edge of the fairground, hands in his pockets, watching from a distance. Their eyes met for a moment, and he nodded. No words, just a small, respectful gesture. It was enough. Back at Haven Hill, life continued, never perfect, always changing, but richer than June had ever dreamed. The ranch's new chapter was written daily, in the brushstrokes of paint on new walls, in the laughter echoing from the kitchen, in the shuffling of horses and the soft voice of June reading aloud to a circle of children under the big sycamore. Ash remained the soul of the place. Every day, June marveled at his resilience, his ability to forgive, to trust, to begin again. She realized that the ranch was not just a haven for others, it was her sanctuary too. It was the place where she learned that ashes could become fertile ground, that broken things could be beautiful, and that love, real, stubborn, patient love, was the flame that made it all possible.
And as the sun set behind the hills, June stood at the paddock fence, watching Ash graze under the golden light, her heart full of gratitude. The past, with all its pain, no longer haunted her. Here, surrounded by friends and found family, she understood at last. Ash and ashes, wounds and healing, sorrow and hope, they all belonged. Here, in this place, everyone did. There's a special kind of quiet that settles over Haven Hill in the evenings, a quiet born not of emptiness, but of fulfillment. It's the sound of contentment, horses shifting softly in their stalls, laughter from the farmhouse kitchen, and the low hum of voices drifting across the yard. In that hush, June Harper found her own heart finally at peace, a feeling she had once doubted she'd ever know again. It had been almost a year since the night of the fire, and the ranch had become more than just a home for June and Ash. It was a sanctuary in every sense, a place where wounds were seen, not hidden, where brokenness was not a weakness, but a source of strength. Every day brought new faces and new challenges, but also new joys. Children's handprints joined the streaks of paint on the barn doors. Fresh flower beds bloomed along the fences, planted by volunteers and watered by giggling foster kids. A mural of Ash, fierce and proud, stretched across the barn wall, painted by a local artist who found her own healing here. Ash had changed too. He was older now, the black in his coat tinged with gray, but there was a new gentleness in him, a kind of quiet wisdom that seemed to invite the wounded and the lost. He was especially attuned to the children who came from places of silence, kids who flinched at loud voices or shrank from touch. Ash never rushed. He simply stood, patient as the sun, until they were ready to reach out. One golden afternoon, a new group of foster children arrived at the ranch, accompanied by social workers and a few nervous volunteers. Among them was a little girl named Rosie. She was 7 years old, her hair a tumble of brown curls, her eyes wide and hesitant. Rosie rarely spoke. When she did, it was in a stutter so pronounced that most strangers struggled to understand her. She clung to the sleeve of her caseworker, shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. June noticed her right away. She knelt beside Rosie, introducing herself in a gentle voice. "This is Ash," she said, nodding to the stallion. He's a very good listener, so he's not in a hurry. Would you like to meet him?" Rosie nodded shyly, but didn't let go of the caseworker's hand. June smiled. "That's okay. You can just watch, if you want." June led Ash out to the paddock, the other children clustering around, eager and bold. Rosie hung back, eyes fixed on the horse. June began her usual routine. The soft words, slow movements, a lullaby under her breath. She showed the kids how to let Ash smell their hands before petting him. One by one, the children stepped forward, laughter rising as Ash nuzzled their palms, searching for treats. After a while, Rosie edged closer, her small hands clenched at her sides. June caught her gaze and offered a reassuring nod. "Whenever you're ready," she whispered. Rosie took a deep breath, cheeks flushing with the effort. She reached out, fingers trembling, and Ash, gentle as ever, lowered his head, nudging her hand. Rosie gasped, wonder lighting her face. For a long moment, girl and horse simply stood together, breathing in time. The world narrowed to the soft press of fur and the rhythm of shared silence. The next day, Rosie came back. This time, she brought a brush, and after a few minutes of watching, began to groom Ash's side in small, careful strokes. Her stutter eased as she whispered to him, telling him stories about her favorite fairy tales, her voice growing steadier with each word. June watched from a distance, tears pricking her eyes, her own scars, inside and out, aching in a way that was almost sweet. That was the magic of Haven Hill. Day after day, stories like Rosie's unfolded, a teenage boy who'd run away from 3 foster homes learning to train a rescued mare, a Vietnam veteran teaching Jamie how to build a saddle stand, Becky from the feed store leading a gardening club for the little ones. The ranch became a patchwork of triumphs and setbacks, laughter and tears, all stitched together by the relentless hope that healing was possible. If not all at once, then one small step at a time. As summer wore on, June hosted an open house to celebrate the ranch's anniversary. Dozens of people came, families, foster children, volunteers, ranchers, veterans, neighbors who'd once been strangers or even skeptics. Wade Mercer was among them, quieter than most, but present, and he stayed by the fence, hands in his pockets, watching Ash lead a group of children around the paddock. At one point, June caught his eye. Wade gave her a nod, and for the first time, a faint smile. That evening, as the sky blazed orange and gold, June stood on the hill overlooking the paddocks. The children were still playing, their laughter ringing out like bells. Ash grazed nearby, Rosie beside him, her hand on his neck. June felt a swell of gratitude so fierce it nearly took her breath away. In the quiet that followed, June found herself thinking about the journey, the pain and anger, the fear and loneliness, the way she'd almost given up. She thought about all the nights spent singing to Ash, about the fire and the loss, about the stubborn belief that something good could come from all that ruin. She realized, standing there, that she hadn't just created a sanctuary for others, she'd built one for herself. Here, in this place, she was allowed to be all that she was, strong and vulnerable, leader and learner, survivor and friend. The ranch didn't erase her scars, but it made them part of a larger story, one that included forgiveness, growth, and the wild, beautiful possibility of starting over. As twilight deepened, June walked down to the paddock where Rosie waited by the fence. The little girl looked up, smiling shyly, her voice soft but clear. "Miss June, is it okay if I come back tomorrow?" June knelt beside her, the familiar ache in her knee a reminder of all she'd survived. "You can come back as often as you want. Haven Hill is your home now, too." Rosie giggled, reaching out to stroke Ash's nose. The stallion snorted, shaking his mane, and the girl burst into delighted laughter. June watched them, her heart light. She turned her gaze to the horizon, where the last light lingered on the hills. The ranch, the horses, the children, the community. None of it was perfect, but it was real, and it was enough. In a voiceover, as if sharing her soul with the world, June's reflection lingered on the wind. "I came here to escape, but I found something worth staying for. Scars don't mean you're broken. They mean you've lived. And if you believe in second chances, for horses, for people, for yourself, don't give up. Comment, and follow for more stories." As the stars blinked on overhead, Ash stood on the highest hill, strong and proud, his shadow long across the grass. Laughter floated on the air, children's voices mingled with the evening breeze. Haven Hill was alive, a living testament to the truth June and Ash had discovered together. Sanctuary isn't just a place, it's the courage to keep believing in hope, no matter how many times you've been burned. And under the vast American sky, everyone, horse, child, soldier, stranger, found a place to belong.